Story: Poor mechanic built a homemade prosthetic for disabled woman next morning. She returns in helicopter. The air in Leo's garage tasted of history. It was a metallic, layered scent, cool iron, the sharp tang of welding ozone, the comforting warmth of engine oil, all mingling with the faint aroma of the coffee that was perpetually brewing in a stained, resilient pot in the corner. Sunlight, thick with dancing dust motes, cut through the grimy upper windows, spotlighting the organized chaos within. To an outsider, it was a mess. Piles of what most would call junk filled every available space. But to Leo, it was a library of potential. He knew the precise location of a 1,982nd motorcycle shock absorber, the tensile strength of a discarded aluminum drone frame, and the smooth, reliable action of a ball bearing salvaged from a totaled sedan. His garage wasn't a graveyard for machines. It was a nursery for their second life. On a workbench, under the steady glow of a bare bulb, sat a half-finished project, a terracotta pot rigged with a complex system of moisture sensors and repurposed IV drip lines. It was for Mrs. Gable next door, whose shaky hands and failing memory often led to her beloved ferns either drowning or dying of thirst. Leo called it the forget-me-not planter. Nearby, a hand-crank radio, its casing made from a polished oak box, lay waiting for its final gear. It was kinetic-powered, designed to work when the electricity failed, a common occurrence in this forgotten pocket of the city. These were the projects that filled his time between fixing flat tires and faulty alternators. They were puzzles that paid in satisfaction, not currency. The clang of a bicycle hitting the pavement outside broke his concentration. "Mr. Leo?" A small, hesitant voice called out. Leo wiped his greasy hands on an already saturated rag tucked into the waistband of his overalls. He stepped out into the afternoon sun, blinking. A girl of about 8, with scraped knees and tear tracks on her dusty cheeks, stood over her fallen bicycle. Her name was Lily. "Hey, Lily. Took a tumble?" he asked, his voice gentle. She nodded, pointing a trembling finger at the bike. The chain, it did that slippy thing again, and then it fell off. Leo knelt, his knees cracking a protest. He surveyed the patient. The chain was indeed off, but that was a symptom, not the disease. His practiced eye immediately saw the real issue. One of the sprockets on the rear gear was bent, a slight, almost imperceptible warp that was enough to throw the chain under pressure. It was the kind of problem a lesser mechanic would miss, simply putting the chain back on and sending the girl on her way, only for it to happen again. "Ah, I see the culprit," Leo murmured, mostly to himself. "A stubborn tooth that doesn't want to play nice with the others." He looked up at Lily. "Don't you worry. We'll have this fixed up better than new. Push it inside." Lily wheeled the bike into the cavernous garage, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and intimidation at the metallic jungle around her. Leo guided her to a clear spot and lifted the bike onto a stand with an easy strength that belied his lean frame. He didn't just put the chain back on. He meticulously removed the rear wheel, took the gear cassette apart, and placed the bent sprocket on a small anvil. With a series of precise, delicate taps from a small ball-peen hammer, he straightened the metal. He worked with a surgeon's focus, occasionally stopping to run his calloused thumb over the surface, feeling for imperfections too small to see. Lily watched, mesmerized, as this greasy man performed his quiet magic. "You see," Leo explained, not looking up from his work, "it's not always the part that breaks that's the problem. Sometimes it's the little thing next to it that's causing all the trouble. You have to look at the whole system to find the real answer." He reassembled the gears, cleaned the old grime from the chain with a special solvent, and lubricated it with a single, perfect drop of oil on each link. He spun the pedal, and the chain now moved in a silent, flawless loop. But he wasn't done. His eyes scanned his library. He spotted a glint of aluminum, a flattened, discarded energy drink can. With a pair of tin snips, he cut 2 neat, rectangular strips. He folded them, punched a hole in each, and attached them with wire to the ends of Lily's handlebars. They were simple, reflective tassels that would catch the light of any passing car. "There," he said, lowering the bike to the floor. "A little extra safety, no charge." Lily beamed, her earlier sadness completely forgotten. She reached into the tiny pocket of her jeans and pulled out a crumpled dollar bill and a few coins. "This is all I have," she offered earnestly. Leo's heart warmed. He crouched down to her level, his face serious but kind. "I'll tell you what. My fee is a promise. Promise me you'll ride safe and watch for cars." Lily nodded vigorously. "I promise. Then we're all paid up," he said with a wink. She hopped on her bike and pedaled away, shouting, "Thank you, Mr. Leo." The new tassels spun in the breeze, catching the sun like little silver flags of victory. Leo watched her go until she turned the corner, the silence of the garage settling back around him like a heavy blanket. He walked back inside and picked up a piece of polished chrome, looking at his own reflection. A man of 30, with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands and shadows of fatigue under his eyes. A familiar pang echoed in his chest. He remembered a different life, a different version of himself. A younger Leo, in a clean polo shirt, sitting in a brightly lit university lecture hall. He'd been one of the top students in a prestigious engineering program, his mind alive with schematics, physics, and the elegant language of calculus. He could design bridges on a computer screen and stress-test virtual engines with complex algorithms. His professors had called him a prodigy. Then the phone call had come. His mother, his only family, was sick. The kind of sick that doesn't get better. He hadn't hesitated. He dropped out, trading the world of theory for the world of necessity. He came home and took over his late father's garage to pay the endless medical bills. He learned that fixing a real, rusted engine with his own two hands was a world away from designing a perfect one on a screen. When his mother passed a few years later, he was left with the garage, a mountain of debt, and a profound, intimate understanding of how things break. He often wondered if he'd made a mistake, if he should have stayed, graduated, become the brilliant engineer everyone expected him to be. But then he would remember his mother's final months, the moments of peace he was able to give her because he was there, and the doubt would fade. He had fixed what mattered most. His gaze drifted to the workbench, to a small, faded photograph propped against the base of a lamp. It was of a smiling woman with his same kind eyes. He picked it up, his thumb gently wiping away a layer of fine dust from the glass. "Still trying to fix things, Mom," he whispered to the picture. "The small stuff, anyway." He had accepted his lot. His genius wasn't going to build skyscrapers or launch rockets. It was destined for leaky faucets, sputtering engines, and broken bicycle chains. He was a master of the mundane, a king of the discarded, and for today that was enough. He placed the photo back carefully and took a deep, centering breath, ready to turn his attention back to Mrs. Gable's planter. That's when he heard it. It started as a sickly cough, a rhythmic sputtering that spoke of fuel starvation or a failing spark. It was a sound that was painfully out of place amidst the distant city hum. The sound grew louder, closer, accompanied by a metallic grinding that made the fine hairs on Leo's arms stand up. It was the sound of a machine in its final moments of agony. A shadow fell across the wide-open entrance of his garage. A car, an old, nondescript sedan covered in a film of road dust, choked, sputtered one last time, and rolled to a dead stop right at the threshold. The engine let out a final, metallic sigh, and then there was only the ticking of cooling metal. For a long moment, nothing happened. The silence was heavy with anticipation. Leo stood motionless, his wrench still in his hand, a strange sense of foreboding washing over him. This felt different from a normal breakdown. This felt like an arrival. The driver's side door creaked open. Miles away and 40 stories above the city's gritty streets, the world was silent, conditioned, and clean. Inside the boardroom of Aerodyne Innovations, the air itself seemed to have been polished, carrying only the scent of expensive leather and the faint, sterile hum of hidden technology. A dozen men and women in impeccably tailored suits sat around a vast mahogany table that gleamed like a dark, frozen lake. At its head sat Ilara Vance. Here, she was not a weary traveler in a dusty sedan. She was a monarch in her court, her presence radiating a quiet authority that commanded the room. Her business suit was a sharp architectural gray, her hair was elegantly styled, and her face, free from the fatigue she would later adopt, was set with focused determination. The only thing that betrayed a hint of an inner fire was the intensity in her eyes as she addressed the board. "The Helios Project," she said, her voice clear and resonant, "is more than an advancement. It is a paradigm shift. We are not just creating a prosthetic. We are creating a seamless extension of the human will. Neural adaptive microprocessors that learn and anticipate a user's movement. A biomimetic ankle joint with multi-axis rotation that allows for walking on uneven ground, for hiking, for dancing. She gestured to the holographic display at the center of the table. A 3D model of a sleek, carbon fiber prosthetic rotated slowly. It was a thing of beauty, a piece of sculpture as much as a piece of engineering. It represents the freedom to forget you ever lost anything, Alara concluded, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the board members. The silence that followed was broken by a smooth, controlled voice from her right. An admirable sentiment, Alara, truly. All eyes turned to Marcus Thorne, Aerodyne's chief operating officer. He sat with a predator's stillness, his silver and black suit a perfect match for his meticulously groomed hair. He was handsome, sharp, and possessed a mind that saw the world not as a collection of people, but as a series of assets and liabilities. He tapped a stylus on the tablet in front of him. A new set of data flooded the holographic display, replacing the beautiful image of the Helios with cold, hard numbers. Red columns, declining profit margins, and projected manufacturing costs. The Helios is also projected to cost over $100,000 per unit to produce, Marcus stated calmly. Retail price would be nearly triple that. We would be creating the world's most advanced prosthetic for a market of less than 1% of amputees. It's a beautiful, noble, and financially catastrophic venture. He leaned forward, his voice a low, persuasive hum. I, on the other hand, propose we pivot our resources to the Apollo unit, a modular, high-strength polymer design, less responsive certainly, but durable, reliable, and with a production cost of under $5,000. We can capture 70% of the market within 3 years. It delivers maximum value to our shareholders and provides a functional solution to the majority of people. An older board member, a man named Mr. Harrington, cleared his throat. He has a point, Alara. Our primary duty is to the company's financial health. Alara's jaw tightened. Our primary duty is to innovation, to pushing the boundaries. We founded this company to break barriers, Marcus, not to build budget-friendly cages. Endo. We founded this company to be successful, Marcus countered, his voice never losing its placid, infuriating tone. Success is what funds future innovation. Your sentimentality, with all due respect, is a liability. The board has seen the projections. I believe the prudent path is clear. He didn't need to poll the room. Alara could see it in their eyes. They were investors, not dreamers. The logic of profit was the only language they truly understood. Marcus had won before she had even finished speaking. The Helios project was dead. The board will take Mr. Thorne's recommendation under advisement, she said, her voice clipped and cold, a formal dismissal. An hour later, Alara stood in her private office, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the city. The skyline stretched out before her, a testament to ambition and power. But today it felt like the bars of a cage. The door opened behind her. You shouldn't have done that, Marcus, she said without turning. Shouldn't have done what? My job? He walked in, closing the door behind him. Here, away from the board, the pretense of politeness fell away slightly. I presented a logical, profitable alternative to your passion project. I saved this company from your idealism. You gutted its soul, she shot back, finally turning to face him. Her eyes blazed. Do you remember why we started this? After my accident, we were going to build things that mattered. We were going to give people their lives back, not just a tool to get by. I remember, he said, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. I was there with you from the beginning, Alara. I know the sacrifices you made, and I honor that by ensuring the company you built remains standing. You see a soul, I see a foundation, and your Helios project was about to crack it down the middle. Be honest with yourself. Who were you really building it for? The question hung in the air, sharp and cruel. Was it for everyone, or was it for the woman she used to be? The woman who would have given anything for the chance to run again without thinking. You've lost your way, she said quietly. No, Marcus replied, adjusting his tie. I've just accepted the way the world works. You should try it sometime. He gave her a tight, sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes and left the office, leaving Alara alone with the silent, panoramic view of a city she no longer felt connected to. She sank into the leather chair behind her desk, the fight draining out of her. Marcus was right about one thing. She had become disconnected. She was surrounded by engineers who read data from a screen, by executives who read profit and loss statements. None of them understood. None of them had ever felt the dull, constant ache of a poorly fitted socket, the slight wobble that destroys your confidence, the subtle squeak that announces your disability to every stranger in a quiet room. Her own prosthetic, the current pinnacle of Aerodyne's technology, hidden beneath her tailored slacks, was a silent, perfect marvel. But it had been designed in a lab just like this one. It had been born from algorithms and stress tests, not from grit and necessity. It lacked a heart. She looked down at the sprawling city. Down there, somewhere in the maze of streets, were people who didn't have a choice. People who had to innovate to survive, who had to fix things with their own hands because they had no other option. What kind of genius was blooming in the cracks of the pavement, unseen and unfunded? A radical, desperate idea began to form in her mind. It was insane. It was illogical. It was everything Marcus would hate. And that's why she knew she had to do it. She buzzed her personal assistant. "Anya, I need you to do something for me. No questions." "Of course, Miss Vance," came the immediate reply. "Get the old sedan out of storage. The one I used to drive in college. Make sure it's running, but not too well. I want a minor, fixable issue. A faulty alternator should do. And I need you to retrieve something from the archives. Project Nightingale. The very first prototype leg they built for me. The one from before we were even Aerodyne." "Oh." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. "Miss Vance, that model was noted for being extremely uncomfortable and unstable." "I know," Alara said. "That's the point. Have both ready for me by tomorrow morning." That evening, Alara stood in her cavernous walk-in closet, a room larger than most city apartments. She pressed a hidden button on her leg, and with a faint whir, the sleek, lightweight prosthetic unlocked from the custom-made socket attached to her residual limb. She placed the marvel of modern engineering on a velvet stand, next to another identical one, her backup. Then, she walked on one leg to a large cedar chest in the corner and opened it. Inside, nestled in faded foam padding, was the ghost of her past. Project Nightingale. It was a clunky, heavy thing. The socket was made of a hard, unforgiving plastic. The pylon was a simple steel tube, and the foot was a solid, inflexible block of rubber. Instead of advanced locking mechanisms, it had thick leather straps with rusted buckles. It was a relic, a testament to how far they had come. With a deep breath, she sat down and began the awkward, painful process of strapping it on. The leather bit into her skin. The plastic of the socket was cold and had no give. When she cinched the final buckle, she felt an immediate, familiar pressure point on the side of her limb that she hadn't felt in 15 years. She stood up. The weight was immense, dragging her down. She took a step, and the foot landed with a solid, graceless thud. There was no energy return, no shock absorption. With every movement, a dull ache radiated up her leg. A faint squeak accompanied her every step. It was the sound of her own private humiliation, bottled for over a decade. She looked at her reflection in the full-length mirror. A powerful CEO in a silk robe, now saddled with a crude, archaic piece of machinery. She looked broken. A grim smile touched her lips. This was perfect. This was the truth. This was her disguise. The pain was a compass, and it was pointing her toward the heart of the city, toward a dusty, forgotten garage, and toward a man who had no idea his entire world was about to break down on his doorstep. The silence left by the dead engine was profound. Leo stood at the edge of his garage, wrench in hand, watching the driver's side door of the sedan swing open with a weary groan. He expected to see a frustrated teenager or a flustered commuter. Instead, a woman emerged, moving with a careful, deliberate slowness that spoke of more than just annoyance with her vehicle. From inside the car, Alara took a steadying breath. The old prosthetic felt like an anchor, and the wave of manufactured pain was a constant, dull roar in the back of her mind. This was it. The plan was in motion. She looked through the dusty windshield at the garage before her. Leo's Auto Repair. It wasn't one of the slick, corporate-owned chains that were slowly sanitizing the city. It was authentic, its hand-painted sign faded by the sun, its walls breathing a history of honest labor. It was perfect. She pushed herself out of the driver's seat, her body tensing as she transferred her weight onto the unforgiving prosthetic. The leg responded with a faint, grating squeak. Her limp was not an act. It was a genuine, painful consequence of the archaic device she wore. She leaned against the car's hot metal frame, her face a mask of tired resolve. As she started toward the entrance, she surveyed the neighborhood, not with the detached judgment of a CEO, but with the focused eye of a scout. She saw laundry lines strung between apartment windows, chalk drawings on the sidewalk, a community living its life in the open. It was a world away from her sterile high-rise, and it was exactly where she needed to be. Leo watched her approach, and his diagnostic mind, usually reserved for engines and machinery, immediately began processing a different kind of data. He saw the slight tremor in her hand as she braced herself against the car. He saw the subtle tension in her shoulders, a sign of chronic pain. But most of all, he saw her leg. His eyes, trained to spot misalignments and mechanical flaws, didn't just see a prosthetic. They saw a flawed system. He noted the poor energy transfer, the way her hip had to compensate for the lack of ankle flexion, the unnatural gait that was likely causing strain on her back and joints. The faint squeak he heard was, to him, the sound of a bearing crying out for grease. He set his wrench down on a nearby oil drum, consciously softening his expression. This wasn't a customer with a car problem. This was a person in distress. "Hello?" Alara's voice was strained, and she was grateful she didn't have to fake the exhaustion. "My car, it just died on me. Can you take a look?" "Of course," Leo said, his voice calm and reassuring. He gestured toward a worn wooden chair standing just inside the garage, a small island of order in the sea of parts. "Please, have a seat. No sense in standing. Let me get this out of the road for you." Without waiting for a reply, he moved to the front of the sedan and with a powerful but controlled heave, began pushing the heavy vehicle into the garage bay. Alara watched him, her first test already underway. Would he sigh with annoyance? Would he make a comment about the car's age? He did neither. He simply solved the immediate problem, his movements efficient and strong. She made her way to the chair, each step a carefully managed effort. The prosthetic protested with another audible creak as she lowered herself into the seat. She saw a flicker of something in Leo's eyes as he glanced over, but it wasn't pity. It was analysis. The same look he'd probably give a sputtering engine. She found the impartiality strangely comforting. Leo popped the hood, the metal groaning in protest. He leaned into the engine bay, his hands moving with a familiar, practiced grace. For a few minutes, the only sounds were the metallic click of tools and the distant city traffic. Alara sat in silence, observing him. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30. His overalls were stained with the ghosts of 1,000 repairs, but his tools were meticulously clean and arranged on a rolling cart. He didn't work with brute force. He worked with intelligence, his head cocked as if listening to the car's secrets. He pulled his head out from under the hood, wiping a smear of grease from his forehead with the back of his wrist. "Well, it's not the worst news," he said, turning to her. "It's a faulty alternator. It's not charging the battery, which is why you stalled out. I have a used one here that I pulled from a similar model. It's in good shape. I can have it installed and get you back on the road in about an hour." He didn't try to sell her a new expensive part. He didn't invent other more costly problems. He gave her a simple diagnosis and a practical, affordable solution. Another test passed. "Thank you," Alara said, the relief in her voice genuine. "I don't know what I would have done." She shifted in the hard chair, trying to find a position that eased the pressure on her leg. The movement, however slight, produced that same grating sound from the prosthetic's knee joint. Leo heard it again. It was like nails on a chalkboard to him. He could no longer ignore the more important mechanical failure in the room. He walked over, wiping his hands thoroughly on his rag, a buffer between his world of grease and her. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Ma'am, forgive me for being forward," he began, his tone gentle, almost hesitant. "I know it's not my place, but I couldn't help but notice your leg." He didn't point. He kept his eyes on her face, giving her the dignity of a direct conversation. "I dabble a bit in mechanics of all kinds." Alara's guard went up instantly. She had prepared for this moment, but the directness of it still stung. She looked down at the offending limb, the leather straps, the clunky metal. "It's old," she said, her voice flat. "The new ones are, Well, they're more than I can afford. The lie felt surprisingly easy on her tongue. This one gets me by. Barely. Leo nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. He looked at his own hands, calloused and capable. Then he looked around his garage at the pile of lightweight aluminum from a wrecked racing drone, the polished steel tubes from a dismantled motorcycle, the small hydraulic dampers from a high-end mountain bike. To others, it was scrap. To him, it was a palette of solutions. An idea, wild and brilliant, sparked in his mind. It was a puzzle he felt an overwhelming urge to solve. "What if I could build you a better one?" he asked, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. Alara's head snapped up. She stared at him, her eyes narrowing. "What?" "A new one," he clarified, his own excitement for the challenge making him bolder. "Something more comfortable, lighter. I saw the way you walk. There's no shock absorption, and the ankle is fixed. That's putting stress all the way up to your hip. I could build a simple suspension system into the pylon, create an articulated ankle joint. It wouldn't be pretty, but it would be functional." He paused, realizing how insane he must sound. No charge, of course, just as a challenge for myself, to see if I could do it. Alara was stunned into silence. This was the moment of truth. She had run this scenario through her head 100 times. She expected a scam, a catch, a proposition. What she did not expect was this: a pure, unadulterated offer of creation, born from a combination of raw empathy and engineering passion. She looked deep into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception or pity. She found neither. She found only a genuine, burning curiosity. "Why?" she asked, her voice low and laced with the suspicion that had been her armor for years. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." Leo considered her question seriously. He leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. "A few years ago, my mom's old pickup truck kept breaking down. I fixed the carburetor, then the transmission, then the brakes. But it was always something. The whole system was just tired, worn out. It was letting her down when she needed it most." He met her gaze, and for a second, Alara saw a flicker of old sadness in his eyes. "I know what it's like to be let down by something that's supposed to support you. Whether it's a truck or—" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely, "or something else. Everyone deserves to move without pain." The simple, profound honesty of his answer broke through her defenses. It was a philosophy, not a sales pitch. He wasn't trying to sell her a product. He was offering to solve her pain. It was the purest motive she had encountered in over a decade. A single, traitorous tear escaped her eye and traced a path through the light dust on her cheek. She swiped it away angrily, embarrassed by the sudden show of emotion. She, Alara Vance, who faced down corporate sharks without flinching, was being disarmed by a mechanic in a greasy garage. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not an uneducated laborer, but an artist standing amidst his medium. She had come searching for a spark of raw talent. She had found an inferno. After a long, weighted pause, she gave a single, decisive nod. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay." A wide, unadulterated grin spread across Leo's face. The challenge was accepted. "Great, okay. While I'm swapping the alternator, if you don't mind, I'll need to take a few measurements. Just the length and the attachment points. And if you could tell me exactly where it hurts the most, that would help me figure out where to reinforce it." As Leo turned away to grab a measuring tape and a notepad, Alara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her heart was hammering in her chest, a wild mix of fear and exhilarating hope. The plan was working better than she could have ever imagined. Leo worked quickly, his hands a blur of motion as he replaced the alternator. True to his word, he then took the measurements of her old prosthetic with a detached, professional focus, scribbling notes and diagrams on a grease-stained sheet of paper. He asked questions about pressure and motion that her own multi-million-dollar R&D team had never thought to ask. An hour later, the sedan's engine purred with a steady, healthy hum. Alara paid him for the alternator, the cash feeling ridiculously inadequate. "Come back tomorrow afternoon," he said as he closed the hood. "It should be ready by then." "I will," she promised. She got back into the car, the old leg still complaining with every movement. But as she drove away from the garage, the pain felt different. It no longer felt like a burden. It felt like the before in a story that was about to change everything. Back in the garage, Leo watched her go, but his mind was already miles away. He wasn't thinking about the woman, her mysterious past, or the simple clothes that didn't quite match her articulate speech. He was utterly consumed by the problem. He picked up the notepad, his eyes alight with the fire of creation. A suspension system from a bike, a joint from a drone, a socket lined with repurposed neoprene. The pieces were already connecting in his mind, forming a whole that would be far greater than the sum of its scavenged parts. The moment Elara's taillights vanished around the corner, a palpable shift occurred in the garage. The air, which moments before had been filled with the quiet tension of their meeting, now crackled with a different kind of energy. It was the electric hum of pure, unadulterated purpose. Leo moved to the large garage door, and with a familiar heave, rattled it shut. The heavy metal curtain fell with a definitive clang, plunging the space into the intimate gloom of his workshop and sealing him off from the world outside. He wasn't Leo the mechanic anymore. He was Leo the inventor, the artist, the problem solver. The puzzle Elara had presented him was infinitely more compelling than any broken engine. This wasn't about repair, it was about restoration. Not of a machine, but of a person. He didn't immediately grab his tools. Instead, he walked over to the workbench and picked up the grease-stained notepad containing his sketches and her measurements. He stared at the numbers, the simple lines indicating length and circumference. But he was seeing more. His mind was a silent storm of angles, pressures, and load-bearing dynamics. He visualized the shock wave that traveled up her spine with every step she took on her old prosthetic. He imagined the awkward, energy-wasting motion required to navigate a simple curb. His notes were a diagnosis of failure. The solution would not be found in a parts catalog. He tossed the notepad onto the bench. Paper felt too small, too confining for an idea this big. He knelt and cleared a large patch of the garage floor with a wide push broom, the bristles whispering across the concrete. The dusty floor became his canvas. He picked up a piece of chalk, and for the next hour, he sketched, erased, and resketched a full-scale blueprint. He talked to himself, his voice a low murmur in the cavernous space. Okay. The socket is the foundation. It can't just be a bucket. It needs to distribute pressure, not create it, like a perfect handshake. Firm, but not crushing. He drew a cup shape, then cross-hatched it with lines indicating flexible zones and rigid support structures. Suspension. That's the key. Not just a spring, it needs damping, control on the compression and the rebound. He looked toward the corner where a high-end mountain bike, wrecked beyond repair, was hanging from a hook. Its rear shock absorber, a sleek cylinder of anodized aluminum with a small dial for adjustments, caught his eye. He drew a miniature version of it, integrating it directly into the pylon, the main support shaft of the leg. And the ankle, he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. That's the real monster. A simple hinge was easy, but it was lazy engineering. It didn't allow for the subtle side-to-side roll needed to stand on a grassy slope or a gravel path. He sketched a ball joint, then crossed it out, too much friction. He drew a complex system of pinions and gears, then erased it with the heel of his boot. Too heavy, too many points of failure. The problem vexed him, a knot in the otherwise smooth flow of his design. He decided to leave a blank space where the ankle should be and focus on what he could solve. With the master plan laid out in chalk on the floor, he began to shop. He moved through his piles of scrap not with random hope, but with the specific purpose of a chef selecting ingredients. His hands roamed over twisted metal, seeking out character and potential. His first stop was a heap of electronics from a hobbyist who had crashed a professional racing drone. Leo salvaged the main frame, a beautiful, latticed piece of aircraft-grade aluminum. It was incredibly light, but designed to withstand tremendous force. It would be the perfect skeleton for the pylon. Next, he went to the remains of the mountain bike. He carefully dismantled the rear suspension, liberating the hydraulic shock absorber. He tested it, compressing it with his full weight. The action was smooth, the hiss of the internal oil, a whisper of pure function. It was perfect. For the socket, he needed something strong but forgiving. He found his answer in an unlikely place. A large, discarded server casing. The case itself was useless, but inside, he found what he was looking for. Thick, flexible, high tensile wiring used for cable management, and a sheet of dense, black neoprene used for vibration damping. He imagined laminating the neoprene inside a custom-molded shell, creating a socket that would grip without chafing. The sun had long since set, and the only light came from the single, stark bulb above his main workbench. The city outside quieted. The distant wail of a siren or the rumble of a late-night truck were the only reminders that another world existed. Leo's world had shrunk to this circle of light, to the raw materials spread before him. He began the forge. The next few hours were a symphony of screaming metal and quiet precision. The high-pitched whine of the angle grinder filled the air as he cut the drone's aluminum frame, sending a rooster tail of brilliant white sparks into the darkness. He worked without goggles, his eyes accustomed to the fiery spray, his movements economical and sure. Then came the welder's torch. He clamped the pieces of the pylon into a jig, the small shock absorber held perfectly in place. He flipped down the dark visor of his welding mask, and the garage was plunged into darkness, save for the tiny pilot light at the tip of the torch. With a hiss, the arc ignited, a miniature sun of blinding blue-white light that threw dancing, monstrous shadows against the walls. He laid down a perfect bead of molten metal, fusing the parts together not as a mechanic, but as a sculptor. The structure he was building was raw, industrial, but it possessed an undeniable elegance. He worked with an intensity that burned away all sense of time. The coffee in the pot grew cold. His stomach growled, a complaint he ignored. His focus was absolute. He wasn't just assembling parts, he was coaxing them into a new purpose, breathing a new soul into them. By 3 a.m., the main structure was complete. The pylon, with its integrated suspension, was a marvel of scavenged engineering. The socket, molded from a thermoplastic sheet he'd heated in an old pizza oven and lined with the soft neoprene, was curing on the bench. All that remained was the ankle. The blank space on his chalk blueprint loomed like an accusation. He stood up and paced the length of the garage, frustrated. He had hit a wall. Every mechanical solution he could devise was too clunky or too weak. He ran his hands through his greasy hair, a sense of defeat creeping in for the first time. He stretched, arching his back and rolling his shoulders to work out the kinks. He rotated his foot, feeling the complex, fluid movement of his own ankle. He felt the way the joint could tilt, pivot, and rotate all at once. Nature had already solved this problem perfectly. How could he replicate it with steel and bolts? As he rolled his shoulder again, a thought struck him with the force of a physical blow. The ball and socket joint. He dismissed it because of friction. But what if the ball didn't touch the socket? What if it floated? His eyes darted around the garage, his mind now racing down a new, electrifying path. He saw a box of old hard drives he'd been salvaging for their powerful neodymium magnets. What if he could create a spherical joint where the ball was suspended in the center of a larger, cup-shaped socket by the opposing forces of precisely placed magnets? It would be a frictionless, multi-axis joint. It would be revolutionary. The fatigue vanished, replaced by a surge of pure adrenaline. It was a crazy, audacious idea, and he had no idea if it would work, but he knew he had to try. For the next 2 hours, he worked like a man possessed, carefully harvesting the small, powerful magnets. He built a housing from a polished piece of titanium, from a high-performance motorcycle exhaust, and a central sphere from a massive ball bearing. It was painstaking, delicate work, the magnetic forces fighting him every step of the way, but slowly, miraculously, it took shape. As the first, tentative fingers of dawn crept through the grimy garage windows, he fitted the final piece into place. He held up the completed prosthetic. It was not pretty. It would never be mistaken for a product from Alara's company. It was raw, unpainted, a patchwork of silver aluminum, black neoprene, and the rainbow hues of heat-treated titanium at the ankle. The welds were visible, strong and honest. The suspension damper was openly mechanical. It wore its creation on its sleeve, but it was a masterpiece. Leo placed it gently on the workbench. He stepped back, his body screaming with exhaustion. Every muscle ached. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. The floor around him was a disaster zone of discarded wires, metal shavings, and spent tools. He looked at the prosthetic, standing proudly under the dim light, and a deep, profound sense of satisfaction washed over him, more potent than any coffee. He had done it. He had taken the broken and discarded pieces of the world and forged them into an object of hope. He didn't know the woman's true story or the incredible consequences his work would have. In that quiet, dawn-lit moment, all he knew was that he had seen a problem and he had built an answer. And it was good. Ilara drove back towards Leo's garage with a sense of nervous anticipation that felt utterly foreign to her. She was a woman who made billion-dollar decisions, who faced down hostile corporate raiders, who commanded rooms with a single glance. Yet, the prospect of what lay waiting for her in that dusty, oil-scented workshop had her hands gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She had spent the morning in a state of suspended animation. She had canceled her meetings, ignored the frantic emails from her board, and deflected Marcus Thorne's inquisitive calls. Her entire world, usually a meticulously scheduled symphony of commerce and power, had narrowed to a single, focal point, a promise made by a mechanic with kind eyes and greasy hands. Part of her, the cynical CEO part that Marcus had so carefully cultivated, told her to manage her expectations. What could one man truly accomplish overnight with a pile of junk? The most she could realistically hope for was a slightly more comfortable, less squeaky version of the relic currently strapped to her leg. It was the principle of the act that mattered, she told herself, not the outcome. But another part of her, a smaller, older part that she had long suppressed, dared to hope. It was the part of her that remembered the spark of genius she'd seen in his eyes, the quiet confidence in his hands. That part of her was terrified of being disappointed. She parked the sedan in the same spot as the day before and killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped out. The familiar, grating pain of the old prosthetic, a stark reminder of her current reality. She walked towards the open garage door, each step a dull thud, her heart hammering against her ribs. Leo was standing at his workbench, wiping down a tool with a rag. He looked up as she approached, and his tired face broke into a proud, weary smile. He hadn't slept. The dark circles under his eyes were a testament to his nocturnal forge, but his eyes were bright, alight with the satisfaction of a creator. "You're here," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "It's ready. I hope." He stepped aside from the workbench, revealing his creation. Ilara stopped dead in her tracks. She had prepared herself for something crude, something purely functional. She had not prepared herself for this. The prosthetic stood on the bench like a piece of industrial sculpture. It was raw, unpainted, and utterly breathtakingly honest. She could see every component, every weld, every clever piece of repurposing. She saw the latticed aluminum of the drone frame forming the strong but light pylon. She saw the sleek mountain bike shock absorber integrated seamlessly into its length. She saw the soft, black neoprene lining the custom-molded socket. And her eyes, trained by years of overseeing the world's top engineers, widened in disbelief as she focused on the ankle. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. It wasn't a hinge or a simple ball joint. It was a sphere of polished metal floating within a titanium cup, held in place by an invisible force. It was elegant, impossible, and beautiful. What is that?" she breathed, pointing a trembling finger at the ankle joint. Leo's tired face lit up with genuine passion. "Ah, that's the best part. I was stuck on how to get multi-axis rotation without friction or weight. So, it's a magnetic suspension joint. The central ball is suspended by opposing magnetic fields. It's totally frictionless. It should mimic the natural movement of a real ankle, or get close to it anyway." He said it so simply, as if describing how to change a tire. Ilara stared at him, speechless. Frictionless, magnetic suspension. Her R&D department, with its $100 million budget, had been trying to crack that problem for 3 years, producing only bulky, power-hungry electromagnetic prototypes. This man had done it overnight with magnets from old hard drives. "It might not be pretty," Leo continued, misinterpreting her silence as disappointment. "And it's a little heavier than I'd like, but it's strong. I tested the welds myself. Shall we see if it fits?" Numbly, Ilara nodded. She sat in the wooden chair, her hands shaking slightly as she began to unbuckle the heavy leather straps of her old prosthetic. The relief of removing the painful, clunky device was immense, but it was immediately replaced by a profound vulnerability, as she sat exposed. Leo approached with the new leg. His movements were respectful, his touch clinical and gentle, as he helped guide her residual limb into the new socket. "Just tell me if anything pinches or feels wrong," he said, his voice low and focused. The first thing she noticed was the feel of the socket itself. The neoprene was soft, gripping her limb firmly but gently, like a firm handshake. There were no sharp plastic edges, no single points of intense pressure. The weight of her leg felt distributed. It was a sensation of comfort she hadn't realized was possible. He helped her lock it into place, the mechanism clicking with a satisfyingly solid sound. For a moment, she just sat there, processing the new feeling. "Okay," she whispered. "Help me up." Leo offered his arm, and she took it, using him for support as she rose to her feet. She put her weight onto the new prosthetic. And then, nothing. There was no jarring impact, no painful pressure point, no squeak or groan of protesting metal. As her weight settled onto the leg, she felt the internal shock absorber compress with a faint, satisfying hiss, absorbing the force. The leg felt alive. It felt like an extension of herself in a way that even her multi-million-dollar Aerodyne model did not. She let go of Leo's arm. She stood, perfectly balanced, on her own 2 feet. She took a single, hesitant step. Her eyes went wide. The magnetically suspended ankle tilted and rolled with the motion, adapting to the slight unevenness of the concrete floor. The movement was fluid, intuitive. As her foot pushed off for the next step, she felt a subtle energy return from the suspension system, a little spring in her step that she hadn't felt in 20 years. She took another step, faster this time, and another. A wide, incredulous grin spread across her face. She walked a full circuit around the garage, her movements growing more confident, more natural with every stride. She wasn't just walking, she was striding. She navigated around a pile of tires, pivoted sharply, and even walked backward a few steps, testing the limits of the design. The leg responded flawlessly to every command, every subtle shift of her weight. She came to a stop in front of Leo, who was watching her with an expression of intense relief and pride. Tears were streaming down her face now, but they weren't tears of pain or sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. Tears of liberation. "How?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. "How is this possible? I haven't walked like this since the accident. I feel steady. I feel whole." Without thinking, she threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. Leo, caught off guard and smelling faintly of metal and coffee, stiffened for a second before awkwardly patting her on the back. "It works then," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. She pulled back, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. The CEO, the strategist, the woman of power, was gone. In her place was just a woman who had been given back a piece of her life. Her composure began to return, and her instincts kicked in. This was more than a kindness. This was a paradigm-shifting invention standing in a garage. She reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. She emptied its entire contents onto the workbench, a thick wad of cash, several $100s at least. "Please," she said, her voice firm, "you have to take this. This is worth more than any car repair. This is priceless." Leo looked at the pile of money, then back at her face. He gently shook his head, pushing the cash back toward her with a greasy fingertip. "I told you," he said softly. "No charge." "That's ridiculous," Alara insisted. "You spent all night on this. You used your own materials. This is genius." "The challenge was the project," he said, his gaze unwavering and clear. "Seeing you walk without pain, seeing that smile on your face, that's my payment. That's all I need." He looked at the leg, a critical eye already assessing its performance. "But this is just a prototype, a first draft. You have to promise me you'll come back if it needs any adjustments. If a weld fails, or if the socket starts to rub, it needs to be tested in the real world." Alara stared at him, her mind reeling. She had come here expecting to find talent. She had found something far rarer, integrity. In her world, everyone had a price. Every action had a calculated return on investment. This man operated on a different currency altogether, one of compassion and genuine satisfaction in his craft. She slowly put the money back in her purse, knowing that to insist further would be to insult the purity of his gift. "I promise," she said, her voice filled with a new, unshakable conviction. "I will be in touch." She turned and walked out of the garage and into the afternoon sun. She didn't limp. Her shoulders were back, her head held high. She strode to her car, not like a victim of circumstance, but like the queen she was, her new leg moving with a silent, fluid grace. Leo's creation hadn't just fixed her gait, it had restored her power. As she drove away, her mind was no longer on R&D budgets or shareholder meetings. It was on revolution. She had her proof. The future of her company, the very soul of it, was not in her gleaming corporate tower. It was back in that dusty garage, with a humble mechanic who had just rendered her entire high-tech division obsolete with a pile of scrap metal and a heart full of ingenuity. The game had just changed, and she was about to rewrite all the rules. The next morning, the world felt blessedly normal. The sun cast its familiar long shadows across the concrete floor of the garage, and the air held the cool, promising scent of a new day. For Leo, it was a return to routine, but something inside him had fundamentally shifted. The deep satisfaction from the previous day's project lingered, a warm, resonant hum beneath the surface of his thoughts. It had been more than a repair. It had been an act of creation that had left him feeling more alive and purposeful than he had in years. He was wrestling with a particularly stubborn toaster, a relic from the 1972nd that Mrs. Gable had brought over, complaining that it only toasted one side of the bread. It was a simple problem, a burnt-out filament on one side, but he was enjoying the simple, honest mechanics of it. It was grounding. As he carefully threaded a new piece of nichrome wire onto the mica board, he heard a sound. It started as a low, deep pulse, a rhythmic thump, thump, thump that was more felt than heard. It was not the rumble of a truck or the growl of a souped-up engine. This sound was different. It seemed to come from the sky itself, a resonant beat that vibrated in his chest and made the tools on his workbench tremble almost imperceptibly. He paused, the toaster's inner workings forgotten. He tilted his head, listening. The sound grew steadily louder, deeper, more powerful. It was the sound of giant blades beating the air into submission. A helicopter. Here. He set the toaster down and walked to the open garage door, wiping his hands on his overalls out of habit. He looked up, shielding his eyes against the morning sun. His neighbors, drawn out of their homes by the same impossible noise, were already pointing at the sky. There it was, a sleek black helicopter, looking like a predatory insect carved from obsidian, was descending with terrifying grace. It wasn't passing over. It was aiming for the empty, weed-choked lot directly across the street from his small garage. The downdraft hit with sudden force, a localized hurricane that whipped up a storm of dust, leaves, and discarded plastic bags. The hand-painted Leo's auto repair sign swung violently on its hinges. Leo stood frozen, his jaw slack with disbelief. This was a neighborhood of peeling paint and chain-link fences, a place where the most exciting event was usually the ice cream truck's weekly visit. Multi-million-dollar helicopters did not land here. The sheer incongruity of the scene was so staggering, it felt like a dream, a bizarre hallucination brought on by lack of sleep. The helicopter's skids touched down with a final, gentle bump, the roar of its turbines spooling down into a high-pitched whine. A profound silence fell over the street, broken only by the nervous murmurs of the small crowd that had gathered. Everyone was staring, their phones held up to capture the unbelievable sight. A door on the side of the aircraft slid open with a smooth, expensive hiss, and out stepped Alara. Leo's mind simply refused to process what he was seeing. This was not the tired, plainly dressed woman from the past 2 days. This woman commanded attention. She wore a sharply tailored business suit of deep charcoal gray that probably cost more than his entire toolbox. Her hair, which had been tied back simply, was now styled in a way that was both elegant and powerful. Her makeup was flawless. She moved with an easy confidence, an innate authority that seemed to generate its own gravitational field. And she was walking on his leg, the raw, unpainted prosthetic, a patchwork of scrap metal and ingenuity, looked jarringly out of place against the fine fabric of her suit, yet she wore it not with shame, but with pride. It moved with the same silent, fluid grace he had witnessed yesterday, but now it carried a woman who looked like she could command armies. Behind her, a man in a dark suit and sunglasses stepped out, carrying a sleek metallic briefcase. He followed a few paces behind her, an auxiliary shadow to her brilliant light. Alara's eyes, clear and focused, scanned the small crowd of onlookers before locking onto Leo's. She offered him a small, genuine smile and began to walk towards him, her path cutting straight through the dusty lot. The crowd parted for her instinctively. Leo felt rooted to the spot, his brain trying desperately to reconcile the woman from the broken-down sedan with the magnate emerging from the helicopter. The two images warred in his head, refusing to merge. "Ilara?" he managed to say as she stopped in front of him, the name sounding inadequate and foolish on his tongue. What? What is happening?" "My full name is Ilara Vance," she said, her voice the same, yet imbued with a new resonance of power. "And I'm the CEO of a company called Aerodyne Innovations. We specialize in advanced robotics and prosthetics." She paused, letting the information sink in. She gestured down at the leg he had built. "And this," she continued, her voice filled with genuine awe, "is the single most innovative piece of practical engineering I have seen in a decade. It's more responsive, more intuitive, and more elegantly designed than prototypes my multi-billion-dollar company has spent years and millions of dollars failing to develop." Leo could only stare, his mind a complete blank. Words formed and dissolved in his throat. "But your car? Your clothes?" he finally stammered. "A test," Ilara admitted, her expression softening with a hint of apology. "A deception, I'll admit, but a necessary one. I was losing faith, Leo. My company is filled with brilliant minds, but they're all stuck inside a glass tower. They innovate for profit margins and shareholder reports. They've forgotten how to feel. I needed to find someone who still understood that the best solutions aren't born from unlimited budgets, but from necessity and compassion." She looked around at his garage, at the piles of scrap and the half-finished inventions. "I've been searching for a year, driving through neighborhoods, breaking down my own car, hoping to find a mechanic who saw more than just a broken part. I was looking for a spark. I found a wildfire." The man in the suit stepped forward as Ilara nodded to him. He placed the metallic briefcase on a clean spot on Leo's workbench and opened it with 2 precise clicks. Leo braced himself, expecting it to be full of cash, a delayed payment for his work. But it wasn't. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was not money, but a single laminated ID card and a sheaf of official-looking documents held together by a gleaming silver clip. It was a contract. "This isn't charity, Leo," Ilara said firmly, her tone shifting from explanation to proposition. "And it's not a reward. This is a job offer. I am creating a new division within Aerodyne, and I want you to run it. Head of Research and Development for our new Accessible Technology division." She picked up the ID card. It had his name on it. Leo Reed, Chief, Innovator. You'll have your own lab, your own team. You can hand-pick them. You will have a budget that, for all intents and purposes, is unlimited. Your only mission," she said, her eyes boring into his, "is to do exactly what you did for me. See a problem and build a real solution. No bureaucracy, no profit-first committees. Just you, your ideas, and the resources to make them a reality for thousands of people around the world who can't afford what my company currently sells." Leo was reeling. The sounds of the street, the murmurs of his neighbors, the whine of the helicopter, it all faded into a dull roar. He looked from the helicopter, an impossible machine parked in his reality, to the gleaming contract, to Ilara's determined, hopeful face. Then he looked back at his own garage, at the greasy walls, and the familiar, comforting chaos. It was his sanctuary, his kingdom of rust and ingenuity. And this woman was offering him the world. He thought of his mother. He thought of his half-finished engineering degree. He thought of all the nights he'd spent wondering if he had made a mistake, if he was wasting his talent on broken toasters and sputtering engines. It all felt like a prelude to this single, unbelievable moment. He looked down at his hands, at the grease etched into his skin like a map of his life. He had always believed his purpose was small, confined to this single garage. Ilara was telling him his canvas was infinitely bigger. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of dawning realization, of fear, and of exhilarating possibility. He took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and opportunity. He met Ilara's intense gaze with a newfound confidence of his own. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. But I have one condition. Alara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Name it. I'm doing it my way, Leo stated, gesturing around at his workshop. I need a lab that has a soul. Less glass and steel, more grease and scrap. The best ideas don't come from clean rooms. They come from getting your hands dirty. Ilara's smile widened. It was the answer she had hoped for. I wouldn't have it any other way, Mr. Reed, she said. Welcome to Aerodyne. The ride to Aerodyne Tower was a disorienting journey into another dimension. Leo sat in the passenger seat of Ilara's sleek, silent electric car, the city sliding by in a blur of muted colors through the tinted windows. He had insisted on wearing his newest pair of work jeans and a clean black t-shirt. It was his version of dressing up, but seated on the buttery Italian leather, he felt as out of place as a greasy wrench on a velvet cushion. The prosthetic he had built sat on the back seat, carefully buckled in. Ilara was wearing one of her own company's models today, a polished, featureless limb that was completely hidden by her tailored slacks. Optics, she had explained with a sigh. Until we're ready for the official reveal, we play by their rules. What are their rules? Leo had asked, looking at his own calloused hands. Ilara had given him a wry smile. Rule 1. Never show them you're smarter than they are, at least not at first. Rule 2. Credentials matter more than results. And Rule 3. Never ever admit you don't know something. Just call for a meeting to strategize a multi-platform solution. You'll be fine, she added, though her tone suggested otherwise. Then they pulled up to the tower, and Leo's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a building, it was a statement. A shard of glass and steel that pierced the sky, so tall that the upper floors disappeared into the low-hanging morning haze. The sunlight glinted off its surface, creating a blinding, impersonal glare. Silent, automatic doors slid open as they approached, admitting them into a lobby that felt more like a modern art museum than a place of work. The floor was a vast expanse of white, polished marble that echoed their footsteps. The air was cool, still, and smelled faintly of ozone and something vaguely floral, an artificial scent designed to be pleasant and entirely forgettable. A single, monolithic desk stood against a far wall, manned by a receptionist who looked up at them, her professionally polite smile faltering for a fraction of a second as her eyes took in Leo's attire. She quickly recovered, her gaze snapping to Ilara. Good morning, Miss Vance, she said, her voice a crisp, practiced melody. Good morning, Chloe, Ilara replied. This is Leo Reed. He'll be working with us. Please issue him a temporary access card for all R&D levels. The receptionist's eyes flickered back to Leo, a flicker of confusion and disbelief in them, before she nodded and began tapping silently at her console. Other employees glided through the lobby, men and women in near-identical dark suits, their faces illuminated by the glow of their phones. They moved with a quiet, hurried purpose, none of them making eye contact. Leo felt a profound sense of anonymity, of being not just out of place but invisible. The elevator ride was even more unnerving. It was a silent, mirror-lined box that shot upwards with stomach-lurching speed, the floor numbers climbing at a dizzying rate. There was no sound, no sense of movement, save for the pressure building in his ears. It was the complete opposite of his garage's old, noisy chain hoist. This was technology as magic, so seamless it felt unreal. The elevator opened onto the 34th floor, the research and development wing. It was a vast, open-plan space, bathed in cool, blue-white light. Rows upon rows of identical white desks were separated by low glass partitions. Engineers sat staring intently at dual monitor setups, their fingers flying across keyboards. The only sound was the gentle, collective hum of high-end computer fans and the soft, rhythmic clicking of keys. There were no personal photos, no quirky coffee mugs, no signs of the messy, chaotic process of creation. It was as sterile as an operating theater. This is it, Ilara said, her voice low. The heart of the beast. She led him through the maze of desks toward a set of frosted glass doors at the far end of the room. As they walked, Leo could feel the eyes on him. Heads turned. Conversations paused. He was a foreign object in a sealed system, a smudge of grease on a pristine white canvas. Ilara pushed open the glass doors, revealing the main project lab. It was here that they were met by a man in a crisp white lab coat. He was tall and thin, with wire-rimmed glasses perched on a sharp nose. He looked at Ilara first, a respectful nod on his face. Elara. We were just running the latest thermal imaging diagnostics. His gaze then shifted to Leo, and his expression soured almost imperceptibly. He looked Leo up and down, his eyes lingering on Leo's worn work boots. Leo. This is Dr. Eris Albright, our lead project engineer for Helios, Elara said, making the introduction. Eris, this is Leo Reed, the innovator I told you about. He'll be heading up our new accessibility division. Albright extended a limp, cool hand. Mr. Reed, a pleasure. Elara has told me about your unorthodox design. A purely empirical approach. Fascinating. We, of course, rely primarily on predictive modeling and finite element analysis before any physical fabrication. Each word was carefully chosen, a subtle but clear demarcation between his world of data and Leo's world of craft. Before Leo could respond, a smooth, confident voice interrupted them. Now, Elara, you can't hoard all the new talent for yourself. Marcus Thorne strolled into the lab as if on cue, a warm, practiced smile on his face. It was a smile, Leo noted, that didn't quite sync with his eyes. His eyes were cold, analytical, and they were scanning Leo with the dispassionate air of a biologist examining a new species of insect. Marcus, Elara said, her voice tightening almost imperceptibly. Leo Reed. This is Marcus Thorne, our Chief Operating Officer. A real pleasure, Leo, Marcus said, his handshake firm, his grip lasting a second too long. It was a subtle assertion of dominance. I must say, I admire Elara's eye for unconventional talent. She has a gift for finding diamonds in the rough. He looked at Leo's t-shirt and jeans. And I do mean rough. He delivered the line with a jovial laugh, as if sharing an inside joke. But the barb was clear. He was framing Leo as a novelty, a pet project. I was just looking at the weekly burn rate for Helios, Marcus continued, turning his attention to Albright. The numbers are ambitious. I trust we're still on track to deliver a prototype for the shareholders' meeting that justifies the expense? Of course, Mr. Thorne, Albright said quickly. We're making excellent progress. Good. Good, Marcus said, then looked back at Leo. Well, Leo, welcome aboard. I'm very interested to see what sort of charming folk art engineering you can bring to the table. He gave Leo a final, patronizing pat on the shoulder and strolled out of the lab, leaving a chill in his wake. Elara's jaw was set. Don't mind him, she said quietly to Leo. His bark is worse than his bite. I don't know, Leo replied, his voice low. Felt more like a bite to me. Eris, Elara said, changing the subject. Show Leo the Helios prototype. Albright gestured toward the center of the lab. There, mounted on a sleek pedestal under a set of spotlights, was the Helios leg. It was stunning. Carved from a single piece of matte black carbon fiber, it was shaped with the sleek, aerodynamic lines of a high-performance race car. There were no visible joints or seams, just smooth, flowing curves. It looked less like a medical device and more like a piece of art from a futuristic museum. Leo walked over to it, his curiosity overriding his intimidation. He circled it slowly. It was beautiful, but it was also sterile. It felt cold, lifeless. Impressive, isn't it? Albright said, a note of smug pride in his voice. The internal processors can predict a user's intent with 98.7% accuracy. The entire structure weighs less than 4 pounds. Leo didn't answer. He leaned in closer, his eyes tracing the lines of the ankle. He reached out a hand, then stopped, looking at Albright. May I? Albright gave a condescending wave. Be my guest. Leo gently touched the ankle joint. He gave it a slight push. It didn't budge. He pushed a little harder from the side, testing for lateral movement. There was none. The joint was designed to move in only 2 directions, forward and back. He stood up straight, a thoughtful frown on his face. It's beautiful, he said, and he meant it. But it's too rigid. Albright's smile vanished. I beg your pardon? There's no torsional flex, Leo explained, pointing to the ankle. It only moves on one axis. The real world isn't a flat treadmill. What happens when the user steps on an angled surface, like the curb out front, or a rock on a path? All of that twisting force has nowhere to go. It's going to travel right up the pylon and put a massive amount of stress on the socket. He looked at Albright directly. Or worse, on the user's hip and back. It's going to cause pain. The other junior engineers in the lab, who had been watching silently, exchanged nervous glances. No one talked to Dr. Albright like that. Albright's face flushed with anger. "We are well aware of the engineering parameters," he said stiffly. "The carbon composite is designed to withstand forces in excess of 2,000 newtons. Your hands-on analysis fails to appreciate the material science." "I appreciate the science," Leo countered calmly. "I just don't think the user's body will. It's not about the leg breaking, it's about the person wearing it." A tense silence filled the lab. Ilara watched the exchange with a flicker of a smile. This was exactly what she had hoped for. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen with a frown. "Damn it, I have to take this. It's the board chairman." She looked at Leo. "I'll be back in an hour." "Eris, get Leo set up with a workstation. Show him the simulation data." She turned and left, the glass door hissing shut behind her. Suddenly, Leo was alone, surrounded by hostile silence and the glares of Albright and his team. He stood in the middle of the vast, white lab, a space that felt colder and more empty than ever before. He instinctively reached for his back pocket, for the familiar, comforting weight of the old adjustable wrench he always carried. But it wasn't there. He had left it in his garage, in his world. Here, without his tools, without the familiar scent of oil and metal, surrounded by people who spoke a language of data and disdain, he felt a profound and crushing sense of isolation. He looked from the perfect, flawed Helios prototype to the hostile face of Dr. Albright. "What in God's name have I gotten myself into?" he thought, the magnificent promise of the morning curdling into the sour taste of doubt. For 3 days, Leo existed in a state of suspended animation, adrift in a sea of corporate purgatory. Dr. Albright, with malicious compliance, had followed Ilara's instructions to the letter. He had provided Leo with a workstation, a state-of-the-art computer, with a dizzying array of software Leo had never seen before. Albright had then proceeded to drown him in data. As you can see from the kinematic simulations, Albright would drone on, pointing at a screen filled with pulsing, color-coded graphs. The gate cycle shows optimal energy expenditure on flat surfaces. The haptic feedback algorithms are running at 99.9% efficiency. Leo would nod, trying to translate the corporate jargon into a language he understood. He didn't know what a haptic feedback algorithm was, but he knew the feeling of a tool vibrating in his hand. He didn't understand kinematic simulations, but he understood the way a person's body shifted its weight as they walked. He saw what their data showed, but he also saw what it was missing. The messiness of the real world. The unpredictability of a cracked pavement. The slickness of a wet leaf. The simple human desire to move without thinking. They were designing a leg for a robot, not a person. He spent his time watching. He watched the engineers stare at their screens, their brows furrowed in concentration. He watched them argue about lines of code and composite layering techniques. And he watched as they repeatedly tested the beautiful, flawed Helios prototype in a massive hydraulic machine in the corner of the lab. This machine was the company's arbiter of truth. It was a stress tester, capable of simulating years of wear and tear in a matter of hours, applying immense pressure and torsional force to any component placed within its powerful clamps. And day after day, the Helios leg failed. The failure was always the same. They would mount the prototype, the machine would whir to life, and a monitor would display the climbing newtons of force. It would pass the standard walking and running simulations, but when the machine began, the uneven terrain protocol twisting and compressing the leg at awkward angles, a microscopic fracture would invariably appear near the ankle joint. A sharp crack would echo through the silent lab, and Albright would curse under his breath, his face tightening with frustration. They tried everything their computer models suggested. They reinforced the carbon fiber layup. They recalibrated the internal sensors. They tweaked the software, and every time, the result was the same: a crack. The atmosphere in the lab grew tense. Marcus Thorne made frequent visits, his presence a silent, looming pressure. He would stand with his arms crossed, watching the tests, his expression unreadable but his disappointment palpable. The Helios project was becoming an expensive failure, and Albright's team was feeling the heat. During one particularly disastrous test, where the ankle didn't just crack but audibly splintered, Leo saw his opening. While Albright was angrily debriefing his defeated team in a conference room, Leo walked over to the testing machine. A young engineer, a man named Ben with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression, was cleaning up the carbon fiber fragments. "It's the same spot every time, isn't it?" Leo asked quietly. Ben jumped, startled. He hadn't expected anyone, least of all the strange garage mechanic, to speak to him. Yeah, right at the primary stress point. The models didn't predict this level of shear. The models are looking at the leg," Leo said, tapping a finger on the machine's metal clamp. "They're not looking at the force. The force has to go somewhere. Your design tries to block it. It's like trying to stop a tidal wave with a stone wall. The wall will always lose." Ben looked at him, his brow furrowed in genuine curiosity. "So what would you do?" A slow smile spread across Leo's face. "You want to see? Come with me." He led Ben away from the sterile main lab to a smaller room at the end of the hall. It was the one concession Alara had insisted upon, a room that horrified the facilities manager. It was Leo's workshop. It had no computers, no whiteboards. Instead, it had a heavy steel workbench with a vise, a drill press, a welding torch, and bins filled with what the other engineers considered junk, odd cuts of steel, aluminum, titanium, and various gears and bearings. To Leo, it was his sanctuary. He picked up a simple, flat bar of steel. "Watch," he said. He clamped it in the vise and hit it hard with a hammer. A loud clang rang through the room. "Now, if I keep hitting it in the same spot, over and over, what do you think will happen?" "It'll get weaker," Ben said. "Work hardening will make it brittle." "Exactly," Leo said. "It gets stressed. The grain of the metal gets tired, and eventually it snaps. That's what you're doing to your carbon fiber ankle. You're hitting it with force from the same direction over and over." Then Leo did something Ben had never seen outside of a history documentary. He fired up the oxyacetylene torch and heated another section of the steel bar until it glowed a cherry red. "Now watch this," he said. He took it to the anvil in the corner and began to hammer it, not with brute force, but with a craftsman's rhythm, shaping and tapering the metal. When you work with the heat, you're not breaking the grain down. You're realigning it. You're teaching it where the force wants to go. You're making it stronger by making it more flexible. He quenched the hot metal in a bucket of oil, a plume of acrid smoke hissing into the air. He handed the now cool piece to Ben. It was no longer a simple bar. It was tapered, slightly curved, its surface bearing the marks of the hammer. It felt stronger, more purposeful. "Your design is fighting the force," Leo explained. "You need to redirect it, disperse it, like a spring or a shock absorber. You let the force do its work, and then you guide it back out." For the next 2 hours, Leo worked, with Ben watching in silent awe. He didn't use simulations or data sheets. He used his eyes, his hands, and an intuitive understanding of physics that felt more like magic than science. He fabricated a new joint, not from carbon fiber, but from heat-treated titanium and steel. It was based on his own magnetic suspension ankle, but simplified, using a nested system of Belleville washers, small, conical springs, to create a mechanical damping system that could absorb torsional stress. It wasn't as sleek or futuristic as the Helios joint. It was heavier, visibly mechanical, and, by Dr. Albright's standards, ugly. "It's not pretty," Leo said, wiping his hands on a rag that looked suspiciously like the one from his old garage. "But I bet it won't break." Word had quietly spread. When Leo and Ben emerged from the workshop carrying the new component, a small crowd of junior engineers was waiting. Dr. Albright, drawn by the sudden silence in his lab, came out of his office, his expression a mask of scorn. "What is this?" Albright demanded, looking at the metal contraption in Leo's hands with disdain. "It's an alternative," Leo said calmly. "Let's put it in the machine." Albright wanted to refuse. He wanted to dismiss this grease-stained mechanic and his crude metalwork, but he was desperate, and more importantly, he was curious. With a curt nod, he motioned toward the stress tester. They unbolted the shattered remains of the official Helios ankle, and with some effort, fitted Leo's heavier, industrial-looking joint into the prototype leg. The sleek carbon fiber now ended in a piece of unapologetic, functional machinery. The engineers snickered quietly. It looked absurd. They mounted the hybrid leg in the machine. Ben stood at the controls, his face pale with nervousness. Albright stood with his arms crossed, a smug "I told you so" look already forming on his face. "Begin the test," Albright commanded. Ben pressed the button. The machine whirred to life. The numbers on the monitor began to climb. 500 newtons. 1,000 newtons. It passed the point where the previous test had failed. 1,500 newtons. The lab was silent. All eyes were on the monitor. 2,000 newtons. A collective gasp went through the room. The last prototype had splintered at 1,640. "Engage the uneven terrain protocol," Albright said, his voice strained. Ben's finger trembled as he hit the next button. The machine began to twist the leg, compressing it at vicious, unnatural angles. Inside Leo's joint, the nested springs compressed and decompressed, absorbing the torsional load with a faint, mechanical sigh. The numbers on the monitor kept climbing. 2,500 newtons. Sensen. The machine reached its maximum programmed force and held it there. The leg did not crack, it did not splinter, it held. The silence that followed was deafening. Albright stared at the monitor, then at the crude metal joint holding fast against forces that had destroyed his own multi-million-dollar design, and his face was a mixture of utter disbelief and profound humiliation. The junior engineers looked from the monitor to Leo, their expressions of mockery replaced by ones of sheer, unadulterated awe. Leo hadn't just built a better component, he had fundamentally dismantled their entire design philosophy in a single afternoon. At that moment, the glass door to the lab slid open. Alara strode in, her eyes taking in the scene at a glance. The stunned faces, the victorious numbers on the monitor, and Albright's pale, defeated expression. Ben rushed to her side, whispering excitedly. A slow, proud smile spread across Alara's face. She walked to the center of the lab. "Effective immediately," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "Dr. Albright, you will continue to refine the Helios chassis. Ben, you and your team," she gestured to two other young engineers who were looking at Leo with hero worship in their eyes, "will now report directly to Mr. Reed. You are the foundational members of the new Up Labs division. Your task is to integrate his design principles into a functional, producible prototype. Congratulations, gentlemen. You're on the ground floor of the future." The young engineers beamed, their loyalty shifting in that instant. Albright simply stared, defeated. Far away, in his silent 40th floor office, Marcus Thorne watched the scene unfold on a small screen on his desk, a live feed from the lab's security cameras. He had dismissed Leo as a piece of sentimental theater, Alara's strange pet project. He had been wrong. He watched Leo, now surrounded by a small group of admiring young engineers, explaining the mechanics of his design. He wasn't a novelty, he was a leader. He was effective, and he was a direct threat. Marcus minimized the video feed. His calm, practiced smile was gone. His face was a mask of cold calculation. Leo Reed was no longer a charming distraction. He was a problem that needed to be solved. And Marcus Thorne was very, very good at solving problems. The weeks that followed were a blur of creation for Leo and his new team. Alara had given them a small, cordoned-off section of the main lab, and Leo, with Ben and the two other young engineers, David and Anya, had transformed it. It was still inside the glass tower, but it felt like an outpost of Leo's garage. One wall was covered in chalkboards filled with his sprawling, hand-drawn schematics. Bins of salvaged metals and components lined another. It was an island of organized chaos in the sterile ocean of Aridine's R&D floor. They were no longer building the Helios. They were building something new. They called it the Up One. The name had been Leo's idea, a nod to his origins and their new mission. It combined the sleek, lightweight carbon fiber chassis that Albright's team had perfected with a refined version of Leo's revolutionary magnetic suspension joint. It was a true hybrid, a marriage of high-tech materials and hands-on intuitive design. The atmosphere in their corner of the lab was electric. Ben, David, and Anya, liberated from Albright's rigid, data-obsessed methodology, blossomed under Leo's mentorship. He taught them to trust their hands as much as their computers, to understand the feel of the materials, not just their specifications on a screen. He would have them close their eyes and feel the difference in vibration between titanium and steel, or listen to the sound a bearing makes when it's perfectly seated versus when it's slightly off. He was teaching them the language of the physical world. And the Up One was magnificent. It was lighter than Leo's original prototype but possessed the same incredible resilience and fluid motion. In the stress testing machine, it outperformed every metric Aerodyne had ever recorded. Alara was ecstatic. She scheduled a special presentation for the executive board, a make-or-break demonstration that would secure the funding and future of Up Labs. "This is it, Leo," she told him the day before the meeting, her eyes shining with excitement. "This is where we show them all what's possible. After tomorrow, Marcus won't have a leg to stand on." Leo, however, felt a knot of unease in his stomach. He wasn't used to this level of pressure, of shareholder value in corporate politics. He was also keenly aware of the two worlds that were colliding. Dr. Albright and his team watched them from their side of the lab with open hostility, their multi-million-dollar Helios project now sidelined and ignored. And Marcus Thorne would occasionally stroll through the lab, a placid smile on his face, offering words of encouragement that felt as thin and sharp as glass. "Incredible progress, Leo," Marcus had said just that morning, looking at the finished Up One prototype mounted on its stand. "Truly remarkable. Let's hope it performs as well in the presentation as it does in the lab. A great deal is riding on this, for you and for Alara." The words were supportive, but the subtext felt like a threat. That night, Leo couldn't rest. He stayed late in the lab, long after his team had gone home, running final diagnostics. He checked every connection, every magnetic element in the ankle joint, every line of code that governed the minimal electronic feedback. Everything was perfect. The prototype stood on its pedestal, gleaming under the lab's spotlights, a testament to weeks of tireless work. It was ready. Satisfied, he finally powered down their section of the lab and headed home for a few hours of restless sleep. The next morning, the boardroom was tense. The entire executive board was present, a jury of stone-faced men and women. Marcus sat beside the chairman, his expression one of neutral observation. Alara stood at the podium, radiating confidence. Leo stood beside the covered prototype, his heart hammering against his ribs. Ben, David, and Anya stood with him, a small, loyal cohort ready to present their work. "For years," Alara began, her voice ringing with passion, "Aerodyne has aimed to build replacements. Today, we present something different. A continuation. A limb that doesn't just replicate movement, but restores freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, I present the Up One." On cue, Leo pulled the silk cloth off the prototype with a flourish. There were appreciative murmurs from the board. Even in this sterile environment, the leg's blend of elegant form and functional power was undeniable. "The Up One's chassis is our lightest carbon composite," Ben explained, stepping forward and pointing to the leg. "But the true innovation, developed by Leo Reed, is the frictionless magnetic ankle joint, which provides unparalleled multi-axis rotation and shock absorption. For the demonstration," Leo said, his voice steadier than he felt, "we will subject the Up One to the Summit Protocol, our most extreme stress test, simulating the rapid ascent and descent of a steep, rocky trail. A test no previous prototype has ever survived." He nodded to Anya, who was at the controls of the stress testing machine they had brought into the boardroom. She mounted the leg in the machine's clamps, her movements practiced and precise. A large screen behind them showed a live feed of the leg and the climbing force metrics. The test began. The machine whirred to life. The numbers climbed steadily. 1,000 newtons, 2,000, 3,000. The leg performed flawlessly, the magnetic joint smoothly absorbing the intense, twisting forces. Leo felt a surge of pride. Alara was smiling. And then it happened. At 3,500 newtons, a force the leg had handled dozens of times before, there was a high-pitched, discordant snap, a sound of metal failing under pressure. On the screen, they all saw it. One of the primary magnets in the ankle joint fractured, its silver casing splitting open. The magnetic field instantly collapsed. With its support gone, the full force of the machine slammed down on the mechanical components. With a sickening crunch, the entire ankle joint shattered, sending fragments of titanium and steel pinging against the machine's safety glass. The Up One, their masterpiece, hung limp and broken in the clamps. A horrified silence descended upon the room. Leo's blood ran cold. He stared at the wreckage, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. It wasn't possible. It was perfect last night. He had checked it himself. Ben, David, and Anya looked utterly devastated, their faces pale with shock. Alara was frozen at the podium, her confident smile wiped from her face, replaced by an expression of pure disbelief. Marcus Thorne was the first to break the silence. He rose slowly from his chair, his face a mask of grave concern and disappointment. "This is deeply unfortunate," he said, his voice resonating with false sympathy. "Truly a catastrophic failure." He walked over to the wreckage, shaking his head slowly. "It seems," he said, turning to address the stunned board, "that Mr. Reed's folk art engineering, while charming, is simply not robust enough for real-world application. It is dangerously unreliable." "That's not possible," Leo burst out, finding his voice. "Something's wrong. I checked every component myself last night. Clearly." "You missed something," Marcus said coolly. He then turned to the board chairman. "Mr. Chairman, in light of this public and dangerous failure, I must formally recommend that we terminate the UP Labs project immediately. It is an unacceptable liability and a waste of shareholder resources. We must revert our focus to the proven, albeit less ambitious, Apollo unit program." Before a stunned Alara could formulate a defense, Marcus pressed his advantage. "Furthermore," he continued, pulling a sleek tablet from his briefcase, "I have taken the liberty of compiling a dossier on Mr. Reed." He projected the contents onto the main screen. Leo's face appeared, next to bullet points. No formal engineering degree, no prior corporate experience. History of using uncertified, salvaged materials. Design methodology is undocumented and reckless. It was a character assassination, painting Leo not as an innovator, but as an unqualified, dangerous amateur who had charmed his way into a position of responsibility and spectacularly failed. "I believe the evidence speaks for itself," Marcus concluded, his voice dripping with faux regret. Alara's heart was in the right place, but her sentimentality has clearly clouded her judgment and put this company at risk. The board members were whispering amongst themselves, their faces grim. They saw a failed project, a dangerous prototype, and a huge potential lawsuit. Marcus had orchestrated it perfectly. He hadn't just sabotaged the leg, he had sabotaged Leo's entire credibility. Alara tried to argue, to defend him, but her words were lost in the tide of doubt and fear Marcus had created. The meeting was adjourned, the future of UP Labs in ruins. Leo stood amidst the wreckage, his mind numb. His team was shell-shocked. Alara was being cornered by furious board members. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see one of the company's security guards. "Mr. Reed," the guard said, not unkindly, "I've been asked to escort you from the premises. You'll need to collect your personal items from the lab." He was being fired. Disgraced. He walked back to the lab like a man in a dream, the guard trailing behind him. He looked at his corner, at the chalkboards covered in brilliant ideas, now rendered meaningless. He began to slowly pack his few belongings into a cardboard box, his favorite wrench, his notepad, a photo of his mother he'd brought from the garage. As he knelt to pick up a dropped pencil, his eye caught something on the floor, half hidden under the workbench. It was a tiny sliver of metal, no bigger than a fingernail clipping, gleaming under the lab lights. He picked it up. It looked like a shaving from a drill bit. But he hadn't done any drilling on the final assembly. He had no reason to. He looked closer. The alloy. It was familiar. It was a specific tungsten carbide blend. He remembered seeing a memo weeks ago about a batch of drill bits that had been recalled from the workshop floor. They were found to have microscopic impurities, making them extremely brittle and prone to shattering under high torque. They were dangerous. They had been locked away in a senior manager's storage closet. Only a handful of people had access. People like Dr. Albright, people like Marcus Thorne. Leo's mind flashed back. The sabotage. It wasn't the magnet itself that had been flawed. Someone had drilled into it. They had drilled a tiny, almost invisible hole deep inside the magnetic casing and plugged it with a piece of the brittle, recalled drill bit. Under the immense pressure of the test, that tiny, flawed piece of metal would have been the first thing to shatter, causing a chain reaction that destroyed the entire joint. It was brilliant. It was subtle. and it was pure evil. He closed his fist around the tiny metal shaving. It was small, but it was everything. It was his proof. He looked up, a fire igniting in his eyes, burning away the shock and despair. They hadn't just broken his prototype, they had declared war, and he was not going to let them win. Armed with a tiny piece of metal and the truth, he stood up and walked out of the lab, not with the shuffle of a defeated man, but with the determined stride of a fighter about to re-enter the ring. Leo didn't go home. He went straight to Alara's office, the small, damning metal shaving clutched tightly in his fist. He found her standing by the panoramic window, her back to the door, the victorious city skyline mocking her defeat. The fight had drained from her posture. She looked smaller, diminished. "It's over, Leo," she said without turning, her voice flat. "The board is calling an emergency session this afternoon to officially dissolve Up Labs and ratify my leave of absence. Marcus won." "No, he didn't," Leo said, his voice quiet but intense. He walked up beside her and opened his hand, placing the tiny metal sliver on the polished surface of her desk. "He just left behind the evidence." Alara stared at the fragment, a confused frown on her face. "What is it?" "It's a piece of a tungsten carbide drill bit," Leo explained, the words coming out in a rush, specifically from that batch that was recalled for being too brittle. The one locked in the senior management supply closet. Someone drilled a micro fissure into the main magnet's casing and plugged it with this. Under pressure, this piece shattered first, setting off a chain reaction. It was designed to fail. It was murder. Alara picked up the shaving, her eyes widening as the implications crashed down on her. The calculated cruelty, the sheer audacity of it. The fog of defeat in her eyes burned away, replaced by a cold, hard fury. This was no longer about a failed project. It was about a fundamental betrayal that struck at the very heart of her company. "Marcus," she whispered, the name a curse. She looked at Leo, a new, fierce resolve hardening her features. "He'll have logs, access codes. He'll have covered his tracks." "Maybe," Leo said, "but he doesn't know we have this, and he's arrogant. He won't be expecting a fight. He's expecting us to walk away." "He's about to be very disappointed," Alara said, a dangerous smile touching her lips. She strode to her desk and buzzed her assistant. "Anya, cancel my leave of absence. And get me the security access logs for the R&D supply closet for the last 48 hours. And tell the board I'll be attending the emergency session. I have one final presentation to make." The atmosphere in the boardroom that afternoon was funereal. The board members were grim, ready to perform the last rites for Alara's passion project. Marcus Thorne sat at the head of the table, a picture of solemn authority. He gave Alara a look of deep, feigned sympathy as she entered, with Leo walking quietly but confidently at her side. "Alara, this isn't necessary," Marcus began smoothly. "The board has already reached a consensus. We're all very sorry for how things—" "Save it, Marcus," Alara cut him off, her voice like ice. She strode to the podium, Leo right behind her. "The meeting will come to order. We have new evidence to present regarding the failure of the Up-1 prototype." A murmur of confusion went through the room. Marcus's placid expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Leo stepped forward and placed the tiny metal shaving under the document camera, projecting its magnified image onto the main screen. "This," he announced, his voice steady and clear, "was recovered from the floor of the lab next to the demonstration area. It is a fragment from a batch of defective drill bits that were recalled and placed in secure storage 2 weeks ago." He looked directly at Marcus, storage that only senior management had access to. On the screen, Alara brought up the security logs she had acquired. They showed only one person had accessed that specific closet after hours the previous night. Dr. Eris Albright. Albright, who was standing against the back wall, turned ghost white. That's a lie. I wasn't." "We also have the lab's high-resolution security footage," Alara continued, her voice relentless. The image on the screen changed to a grainy but clear video from the night before. It showed Albright, looking nervous, being met at the lab entrance by Marcus Thorne. It showed Marcus handing Albright a small object. It showed Albright later, when he thought no one was looking, leaning over the Up-1 prototype with a microdrill. The sabotage took less than 30 seconds. The boardroom erupted. Albright looked at Marcus with panicked, pleading eyes, but Marcus's face was a mask of stone. He was already cutting his losses. "It seems Dr. Albright acted alone out of professional jealousy," Marcus said coolly, already spinning the narrative. A disgruntled employee. I am as shocked and appalled as the rest of you. Are you? Leo challenged, stepping forward again. Or were you just smart enough not to get your own hands dirty? Who promised Albright he'd get his Helios project back if Up Labs was dissolved? Who stood to gain the most from this failure? The questions hung in the air, potent and unanswerable. Marcus had no evidence against him, but in the court of opinion his guilt was clear. His credibility, so carefully constructed, shattered in an instant. He had been exposed not as a leader, but as a conspirator. With the room still reeling, Alara seized the moment. This was never just about a new product, she said, her voice ringing with renewed passion. It was about the soul of this company. Do we want to be a corporation that succeeds by crushing innovation and sabotaging its own people? Or do we want to be one that uplifts them? She looked around the table at the shocked faces. The failure yesterday was not in the technology, it was in our culture. A culture of fear and profit at all costs that Marcus has fostered. She clicked to a final slide. It wasn't a graph or a chart, it was a video. Before you vote on the future of this company, she said, I want you to see what we're really fighting for. The video was simple, filmed on a phone. It showed a man in his 40s with a kind, weathered face wearing a hard hat. He was standing on a bustling construction site. My name is Miguel, the man said. I'm a steel worker. Or, I was. Lost my leg in a site accident 2 years ago. The standard prosthetic I got, it wasn't stable enough for the high beams. I couldn't work, couldn't provide for my family. The camera panned down. Miguel was wearing a rugged, unpolished version of the upper one of Leo's early test models. The video then showed him walking effortlessly across a narrow steel I-beam, 20 stories in the air. He navigated piles of rubble. He climbed a ladder. He moved with the confidence and grace of a man who had been given his life back. The video ended with Miguel at home, playing soccer in the backyard with a little girl with familiar reflective tassels on her bicycle handlebars. It was Lily, the girl from Leo's neighborhood. My dad's a superhero again, Lily said to the camera, beaming. The video ended. The boardroom was completely silent. Several board members were discreetly wiping their eyes. The cold, hard numbers of Marcus's profit projections seemed meaningless in the face of that simple, powerful human story. Alara didn't need to say another word. The board's vote was unanimous and swift. The investigation into Marcus Thorne and Dr. Albright would begin immediately. And Up Labs was not only reinstated, its funding was doubled. Months later, the new Up Labs was a vibrant, thrumming hub of creative energy. It was exactly as Leo had envisioned, a perfect fusion of a high-tech lab and a hands-on workshop. Sleek computers and 3D printers stood alongside welding torches and anvils. The air smelled of ozone, hot metal, and coffee. Leo, wearing a clean lab coat over his customary t-shirt and jeans, stood with Alara, watching as the first official shipment of the Up One was being boxed up. The legs were affordable, durable, and destined for community clinics and veterans hospitals around the country. Miguel and his daughter Lily were there. A special thank you to the man who had unknowingly become their star test pilot. Lily ran up to Leo, giving him a fierce hug. Thank you for fixing my dad, Mr. Leo, she said. Leo crouched down, his heart full. He looked past her, at the boxes, at his team laughing as they worked, and at Alara, who was watching him with a look of immense pride and gratitude. He had started in a small garage, trying to fix the broken things in his little corner of the world. Now, his corner was the whole world. He was finally fixing things on a scale he had never dreamed possible, and he was just getting started. True innovation isn't always born in a boardroom. Sometimes it starts with a piece of scrap, a wealth of kindness, and the belief that everyone deserves to move forward without pain. Leo's journey has just begun, and the world is waiting for what he will build next. Thank you for watching this Up Story. What did you think of Leo's journey? Let us know your favorite moment in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, keep looking for the heart in the rust.